There is today, perhaps, the most subtle and fascinating of all theories about our existence. It does not speak of ancient gods or invisible forces, but of the language that rules our world: code. It is a theory that touches us deeply, for it echoes our oldest longing for meaning. It is the conviction that our reality, from the movement of galaxies to the flow of our inner thoughts, is not the result of blind chance, but operates under a matrix, a simulation. It is like a coded system whose perfection and logical precision are so vast that they suggest an underlying intelligence, a master algorithm beyond our daily perception. This is the famous search for a programming mind behind matter. This notion resonates in a very particular way with the modern mind. We are immersed in systems, algorithms, and data structures. We seek patterns in everything from social networks to the financial market. When we look at the complexity of the universe, the perfection of orbits, the delicacy of DNA, the laws of physics, we feel an almost intellectual satisfaction in accepting that this cannot be just chaos. This idea is fascinating because it rescues our search for a creative principle, but translates it into the language we master: structure and information. It offers us an intellectual refuge, turning the mystery of existence into something that, in theory, can be understood, perhaps even decoded. It is the modern mind's desire to find a purpose that is programmed, a map that guides us. Yet this elegance hides a subtle trap. When we obsessively focus on this coded structure, we forget to look at the substance that truly sustains it all. After all, if our mind is so used to seeking systems and codes, how can we be sure that this theory is not just a reflection of our own technological mindset, rather than a fundamental truth about existence? However, there is a fundamental flaw in the code of this theory. It cannot program something that is seemingly so simple, but at the same time essential to our existence. This is a radical inversion of perspective. So let's explore the one thing in your life that is completely irreducible to any algorithm, and that, paradoxically, the simulation itself requires in order to exist. This fixation on the idea that reality is a coded system has very concrete roots in our daily life. We live in an environment where everything is mediated by interfaces, screens, and information systems. Our relationships, our work, our leisure, almost everything passes through a machine logic. This conditions our mind to function like a processor, always seeking inputs to generate outputs, searching for patterns and trying to anticipate the rules of the simulation. We have become so dependent on technology to organize the world that, intuitively, we apply the same logic to the organization of the universe, accepting the idea that we are just a piece inside a great cosmic computer. This stance defines our time, the information age. It is far easier for the contemporary brain to accept the figure of a master programmer who created the system than to confront the idea of an immense, formless mystery that cannot be categorized or controlled. The simulation offers us a sense of hierarchy and control. It tells us there is an answer and that this answer, with effort and intelligence, can be reached. This intellectual comfort is powerful, for it turns our existential fear of chance into the security of a purpose, even if that purpose is imposed from outside. The great comfort we draw from this vision is that we are protected from vulnerability and unpredictability, because if there is a programmer, there is a plan, and if there is a plan, everything that happens to us, no matter how painful or confusing, has a coded reason. It is a way of trying to master our journey, turning the spontaneous flow of life into a manual of instructions. The problem with this dependence is that it distances us from our innate capacity to simply be, forcing us to seek validation and direction in something external, a kind of meta-server. However, when we reduce life to this set of rules and functions, we reduce ourselves as well. If the universe is a simulation, what is the intrinsic value of a tear, an act of forgiveness, or a moment of deep silence? Where does the code store our irreducible essence? This vision, while giving us the comfort of control, inevitably leads us to see ourselves as mere data or inputs being processed by a larger system, diminishing our capacity for consciousness to a side effect of the machine. The challenge here is not to refute the possibility of a simulation, which is, after all, a hypothesis, but to question what this hypothesis makes us lose. If we are always searching for structure out there, in the matrix code, in the patterns, we become blind to the richness and depth that cannot be quantified. The mind, so used to measuring and calculating, neglects the one thing that does not need to be coded to exist: the experience itself. If the beauty of life does not fit within lines of code, we need to understand exactly where this fails to give us the wholeness of our own existence. The beauty of any theory that proposes a simulated reality lies, paradoxically, in its ability to simplify the complex. It is an undeniable intellectual satisfaction to see the vastness of the universe reduced to an elegant set of equations and lines of code. For the mind that seeks clarity, the idea of a master code is irresistible, for it offers the promise that there is no chaos, only a system we have not yet fully mastered. It is like having a map of a vast city. The map is beautiful, precise, and gives us security, but it can never convey the smell of rain on the streets or the feeling of getting lost and finding ourselves again. When we apply this matrix metaphor to life, we turn existence into a spreadsheet. Love is reduced to a biochemical impulse for data replication. Art, the sublime beauty of a symphony or a painting, becomes a mere artifact of informational complexity. This reductive elegance fails dramatically to recognize what philosophers call qualia, the subjective and intimate quality of experience. The theory can describe the wavelength of the color blue, but it cannot in any way explain the unique experience of seeing and feeling blue. This reduction is also a spiritual limitation. After all, if we are only data to be processed, where is the dignity of suffering and the depth of our quest for transcendence? A code cannot account for the weight of grief, the mystery of empathy that connects us to a stranger, or the overwhelming awe we feel when gazing at the stars. This is the signature of what is fundamentally human and therefore irreducible to any metric. The insistence on seeing reality as a simulation forces us to treat our inner experience, our conscious essence, as a mere side effect of matter or information. This inversion is the error we seek to uncover. When we try to analyze the structure, the code, we forget the living presence that is observing and sustaining it all. The search for this matrix, for this universal engineering, becomes an escape from the immediate mystery that is ourselves. What manifests here is a profound illiteracy of the soul. We become experts at decoding the external, but lose the ability to feel the internal. To find the fundamental answer, we need to stop looking for the world's code and turn to the silent observer who is aware of it all. It is at this point that the search for the simulation meets its limit. We need to make the most radical inversion of perspective. No matter how sophisticated the matrix, no matter how perfect the code, it requires a fundamental condition to exist, something or someone to experience it. Any reality, whether made of matter, data, or energy, needs an observer, for the code demands presence. Consciousness, this capacity to be aware, is the factor that no simulation theory can explain without first presupposing its existence. The materialist view, so present in our culture, tries to turn consciousness into a result of the brain, a side product like heat is a product of a lamp. But this analogy fails. Consciousness cannot be the product of the brain if it is consciousness itself that allows the brain and the idea of the brain to be perceived and conceived. The error here is to try to make the effect the cause. Consciousness is not a system output or an evolutionary accident. It is the fundamental field in which the system, the structure, the laws of physics, the code itself, manifests. Without this field of awareness, the simulation would be only an empty potential, a lifeless abstraction. The very formulation of the simulation theory is only possible because there is a presence that conceives and questions it. What truly matters, then, is not whether the universe is a simulation, but who is the observer that makes the experience of this universe possible. This presence cannot be coded, is not located in space or time, and does not operate by algorithms. It is the basis of all our experience, the one thing that is always here, silently, before and after any theory. It is the only certainty we have to begin our true journey. If consciousness is the essential condition for anything to exist for us, the next step is to stop seeking the code and begin investigating the medium in which all code appears. And the answer to the nature of reality lies in a shift of focus that leads us to our deepest essence. To truly understand the nature of our existence, we need to go beyond the common belief that consciousness is a sophisticated product of matter. We must accept the possibility, supported by centuries of wisdom, that it is what we are in our most intimate nature, the universal medium where all matter and all thought manifest. We can picture consciousness as a vast field of clarity, an inexhaustible ocean. The body, the brain, the senses, the idea of an external world, all of these are only waves or forms that arise, move, and dissolve within this field. The wave is made of ocean but does not create it. In the same way, everything you have ever experienced, the weight of pain, the color of a flower, the speed of a thought, has occurred within consciousness. It is the only constant, the single, undeniable fact of the entire journey. If we accept that consciousness is the substrate and not the product, our search for meaning changes dramatically. We are no longer seeking a purpose imposed from outside. We are discovering that purpose is the very essence from which everything emanates. This perspective removes life from the passivity of being mere data and places us back in the authority of being the presence that contains reality. This inversion is the core of many traditions of self-knowledge. It invites us to recognize that the world is not an object separate from us, to be analyzed from afar, but a living experience happening within us. Our fundamental identity is not the mind that thinks about the simulation, nor the body that lives within it, but the silent space in which both the mind and the body appear. From this, consciousness as medium, we can look at the historical and scientific structures that have tried to explain reality. They inevitably end up confronting this same primacy of consciousness, forcing them to rethink matter and the universe itself. This view of consciousness as the foundation and not the product is not a recent speculation. It has been the challenge of philosophical idealism for centuries. While materialism insists that only matter exists and that the universe is a set of external, independent objects, idealism questions our only certainty, experience. Its central maxim is provocative. To be is to be perceived. The only way we can confirm the existence of a tree, a physical law, or an emotion is through our perception of them. The world, ultimately, is an experience. Philosophers argued that the physical universe is not a reality out there, totally separate from the mind, but rather the structured manifestation of a single universal consciousness. In other words, what we call world is a consensual projection within this field. This stance is not an invitation to deny reality. It is an invitation to reevaluate it. Reality is no less real. It is fundamentally more intimate, made of consciousness and not inert matter. It transforms our existence from a meaningless accident into an act of creative manifestation. Instead of seeking truth in the particles and codes of the matrix, we must seek truth in the source of perception. If everything is a manifestation within consciousness, the boundaries that separate us from the external world and from each other begin to dissolve. The search for truth becomes a journey of reunification with our deepest nature, a return to essence. This ancient and profound understanding has, surprisingly, begun to find striking parallels at the frontier of modern physics. Physics, in its deepest investigations of matter, has been forced to confront the central role of consciousness in ways that old materialism could never imagine. Famous quantum mechanics, which studies the behavior of matter at the subatomic level, reveals that reality is not as objective as we thought. The simple act of observing or measuring a particle changes its behavior, causing it to move from a state of potentiality, wave, to a defined state, particle. This phenomenon, known as the observer effect, suggests that the clear separation between observer and observed is, at the very least, an illusion. It is not the laboratory instrument that causes the change. It is the presence of observation that seems to inform reality. In the language of simulation, we could say that the act of being aware is what collapses the code or renders the pixels into a single experience reality. This places consciousness not as a mere passive spectator but as an active participant in the unfolding of the cosmos. Furthermore, new theories in neuroscience and philosophy, such as integrated information theory, seek models that elevate consciousness from an accidental byproduct to a fundamental component of the universe. The idea is that consciousness may be an elemental property of reality, like space and time, and not something created by matter, but something that simply is. This turns our brain from a producer of consciousness into a receiver or channel of this fundamental consciousness. However, traditional science still struggles to close the gap between the experiential and the physical. Neuroscience can map which neurons fire when we feel joy, but it cannot explain the subjective feeling of joy itself, what philosophers call qualia. The description of the brainwave or the neural chemistry is the how, the mechanism, but fails to explain the what, the living experience. To try to reduce love, pain, and awe to chemical impulses is to drain the meaning of our humanity. If not even the most advanced physics can explain the conscious presence that observes its own experiments, perhaps the answer is not in the complexity of what is observed, but in the simple and immediate nature of the observer. The deepest error of any vision of a simulated reality is that it insists on reducing the qualitative to the quantitative, treating life as a mere sum of data, synapses, or codes. When we accept this reduction, we lose the ability to honor what is truly rich in our journey. A code can map the chemical reactions of fear, but it cannot convey the existential weight that fear carries. It cannot quantify the courage needed to overcome it. This constant attempt to level life to the metric of the machine has an immense spiritual cost. It leads us to see the body and mind as pieces of a mechanism to be fixed, optimized, and controlled, rather than as living manifestations of a conscious essence. If our suffering is only a bug in the code, and our joy only a chemical output, our life becomes less meaningful and less vibrant. The mystery of our humanity is replaced by the coldness of an equation. The light you see, the sound you hear, these are not just processed signals. They are subjective phenomena happening in a field of consciousness that receives and perceives them. Consciousness is the space in which everything appears and disappears. To ignore this is like an illiteracy of the soul. We become experts at decoding the external world, but blind to the intimate reality that sustains us. If we continue in this search for an external code, we move away from the one thing that is here, now, waiting to be noticed. The true depth is not in the complexity of the universe's software, but in the presence that observes that complexity. And no theory can explain the act of being present. It is in our own conscious essence that the answer to the nature of reality resides, not in a mathematical formula or a matrix code. Focusing on hacking the universe is what prevents us from simply being. The journey is no longer about understanding the universe, but about awakening to what we fundamentally are. We have now reached the threshold where the mind, with all its analytical capacity, must recognize its own limit. The simulation, the code, matter, idealism, all of these are, ultimately, theories, models, and content that arise and unfold within our mind. Our main mistake is to try to capture fundamental reality with yet another thought, another definition. But consciousness is not something to be thought or defined. It is the field in which all thought, all definition, all seeking, and all theory appear. The search for understanding, if not careful, imprisons us in a cycle of more concepts. This distinction is vital for self-knowledge. Consciousness is not a concept we need to adopt or a belief we need to force. It is the immediate presence that makes the very act of questioning possible. No matter how sophisticated our theory about the universe, it will always be only a wave manifesting in the ocean of our perception. If our goal is to find the irreducible truth, we need to stop looking at the waves and turn to the depth that remains calm and unchanging, even when the storm of thoughts is at its peak. The search for a code that gives us the rules is in fact a manifestation of our deep desire for stability and certainty. We want the universe to tell us who we are and what our purpose is. The paradox is that the stability we seek is already here. It is not coded in distant particles, but present as the unchanging ground of all our experience. This consciousness does not move, does not age, and does not change with the passing of thoughts or emotions. It is the fixed point on which all the transience of life unfolds. Often the mind resists this simplicity, for it has been trained to value complexity and intellectual achievement. It wants truth to be hard to reach, full of steps and proofs. But the fundamental truth is much more intimate and immediate. It is not beyond us in cosmic engineering, but here, as the silent space that allows the sound of the universe to be heard. Recognizing this requires an act of surrender to the simplicity of presence, an act that is, ironically, the most challenging of all. So, the next step in our journey cannot be intellectual. It is not about reading more books or formulating a better theory. The mind has brought us to the limit of what is possible to conceptualize. Now, we need to make the perceptual leap. It is time to move our attention from what consciousness contains, thoughts, theories, the simulation, to what consciousness is, the space, the presence, the witness. This is the door to what is more real than any code. If consciousness is the foundation, it is through direct experience, a brief internal experiment, that we can finally verify this truth for ourselves. It is at this point that we abandon theory and turn to direct experience, to a brief inner experiment. So, I invite you to pause all your searching, all your analysis, and simply notice. For a moment, close your eyes and shift your attention away from the objects of the external world and even from the objects of your mind. It is not about trying to stop thinking, which would result in another mental struggle. It is simply about observing what is happening. Allow your thoughts to arise and disappear freely, like clouds in the sky. They will bring with them ideas about anything, concerns of the day, memories of the past. But instead of engaging with the content of these thoughts, begin to focus on the space in which they are appearing. Where do they come from? Where do they go? You will notice that thought has a form, a content, a lifespan. But what is aware of the arrival and departure of these thoughts remains unchanged. This is the first glimpse of the presence we seek. This unchanging presence, the field of consciousness that witnesses the mind, is the only thing that has never left you. It was here when you were born, it was present in your greatest pain, and it will be here in your greatest joy. It is what never moves, even when the drama of life and the concepts of a simulated reality are in turbulence. It has no beginning, no end, and crucially, it is not coded. It simply is, silent and complete, before any attempt to define it. It is important to recognize that this pure consciousness is not a feeling, an emotion, or an idea you need to have. It is the space that welcomes all feelings, emotions, and ideas. The act of shifting attention from mental content to the source of attention is the most radical perceptual leap we can take. It is what many traditions call awakening. It is not something to achieve, but something that reveals itself when the conceptual mind grows quiet enough to notice what has always been here, available and immediate. This direct recognition, the awareness of consciousness as the only certainty, is not new. It is the same truth to which all the great spiritual and mystical traditions of humanity have pointed, linking our modern experience to a timeless thread of wisdom. Consciousness is the point of convergence toward which mystics, philosophers, and great teachers have pointed through the ages, using different languages but describing the same experience. In the East, it is called Atman, the essence that transcends personality and body. In Buddhism, it is the clear mind or Buddha nature, the pure substrate free of thoughts and concepts. These traditions teach that the search for truth is not a path outward but a journey of recognition, of turning attention to the source from which we have never been separated. The great mistake of the rational mind, especially in the search for a matrix, is to treat truth as a mathematical formula to be solved, a problem to be decoded. But the fundamental truth is not content to be acquired, nor an answer to be found. It is the very context in which the search occurs. Consciousness is the screen on which the movie of life is projected. No matter how complex or dramatic the film, the screen remains untouched. True wisdom is in recognizing the screen, instead of getting lost in the plot. The challenge, however, is that our mind, trained by the information age, fiercely resists the simplicity of this presence. It is conditioned to value the complex, the logical, and what requires effort. It is far more comfortable and familiar to lose ourselves in the complexity of a simulation than to rest in the simplicity of what we are, because the simplicity of essence confronts us with the need to release our control. When you recognize this presence, the need to decode the matrix fades, because the source of all meaning is revealed within yourself. This revelation turns the search into full existence. The search for the simulation or for a universal code captured something real in us, the innate desire for structure, connection, and a meaning that transcends mortality. Yet, as we looked for this answer exclusively out there, in matter, in data, in the matrix code, we were looking in the wrong direction. The paradox is that what we seek, the unshakable foundation, the source of truth, is not a structure to be discovered, but the presence that observes all structure. Consciousness is the irreducible ground of all reality. This simple shift of perspective changes everything. It removes us from passivity and restores us to the authority of being the conscious field in which life unfolds. And as a result, reality is not less real but fundamentally more intimate, made of the same essence that you are. This is not about adopting another belief or entering a new philosophical system, but about honoring the immediate experience of presence. Whenever your mind is pulled toward the complexity of theories, toward the anxiety of what will be, remember to turn your gaze toward the source of attention. Simply notice what is aware of that thought or that worry. This act of noticing is the true awakening. When you rest in this certainty, the endless search for answers fades because the source of meaning is revealed within. Life stops being an equation to be solved and becomes a living manifestation to be experienced. You don't need to decode the universe. You are, fundamentally, the one thing that requires no decoding. So, I hope you remain in the certainty that what you seek is not far away, but here, now, available to be noticed. Thank you for embarking on this journey with me. If this video resonated with you, I invite you to like and subscribe to our channel. Share this video with others so they can benefit from this message. And don't forget to leave a comment below sharing your thoughts, reflections, and experiences. Thanks again for watching and for joining me. Take care and see you soon.